So we move into two sessions now that are more focused on the economy rather than politics. So less discussion of elections and more discussion of the recovery, the hoped-for recovery of Zimbabwe. This session, we have two speakers. I'm afraid apologies have come from the managing director of Beckman Coulter, René Snyman, who is unable to join us, but we are joined, I'm glad to say, by Julian Lovu from Anglo Platinum and by David Monyeya from the Development Bank of Southern Africa. This is a session that's looking at the longer-term outlook for Zimbabwe, the prospects for reconstruction and the risks of that not happening. Before we get into that, I'd like to announce that we've just had confirmed that this event will be repeated next year in August in Harare, and the Prime Minister has agreed that we will do this again in August 2011. So let's move into this session. I'll ask, first of all, each of our speakers, our delegates, to give a short introduction to what they would like to say and who they are. Not set-piece speeches from the lectern now. It's more of a conversation between us up here and then with you in the room, and again with our eminent speakers and delegates who have agreed to continue the conversation. So could I ask, from the point of view of Anglo Platinum, how you see Zimbabwe's prospects and what are the things that you're focusing on with the economy in the coming years?
I suppose when one thinks about Anglo and Zimbabwe, one has to start from the point of view that we have been around 80 years in Zimbabwe. That's how far our history goes. We've been with Zimbabwe through the lows and the highs, and therefore we're a long-term investor. As a mining organization, we are in the long-term game. And therefore the view we take on Zimbabwe is a long-term view beyond the problems of the last 10 years, Prime Minister, if you may want to know, and the immediate transitions that we're seeing. We look at the country through the lens of the potential that it can offer to our businesses. In contextualizing the long term, I think one has to think about some of the things that we have done as a mining organization. And I think some of those speak in general to any mining investment. In the last 7 to 10 years, what we've done is realign our portfolio to focus on what we call Tier 1 mining assets, which are long life, low cost assets with real scale. That is quite important from a Zimbabwean point of view because while Zimbabwe is endowed with a lot of mineral resources, not many of those resources, however, do fall into what we call Tier 1 typical assets, which are large deposit, low cost, and long life. And in putting together an investment thesis and doing your risk-reward case, those are some of the things you look at. So where we are and going into the future, what is quite important for us? What is quite important for us is to have access to what I've just described, which is long life, large deposits, and platinum do come into that portfolio. And that's why the single most important investment we've got in the country is the development of the Unki platinum deposit. There are other assets in the country which fall into that category. And one of the things that I think will set the country up for success is to think through the mining policies, the regulations, and how these policies are crafted to be able to attract mining capital into a country whose assets are not necessarily Tier 1. So, for instance, as an example, one wouldn't want to see coal deposits being parceled into small parcels because they just become sub-economic for typical coal miners, as an example. So that's the one thing that I think from a mining policy is quite important. Being in the long-term game, the one thing that we look out for, and is quite important, is policy certainty and consistency. The debate on indigenization can fall into two categories. What is the content of that mining policy as it affects us? But how consistent is it being implemented, and how much is it changing? Because we take long lead decisions before we actually get cash flows. So that consistency is actually quite important for us, because whatever the policy is, we can discount that into our investment thesis. And therefore we make that decision based on an assumption that there's stability from a policy point of view. The other thing that one would want to see in Zimbabwe, which enables what we need to do, is access to skills. Zimbabwe is endowed with a well-educated population. In the last few years, however, a lot of those people have left the country. So whilst we've got an educated populace, from a mining technology point of view, we don't necessarily have access to the best skills. So in terms of developing your policies going forward, attracting some of the skills that have left for the diaspora, some of whom today might actually classify themselves as foreigners holding foreign citizenship, is quite important to attract it back and set up the mining industry for success. Getting back our institutions of learning to a level where they're delivering world-class skills is just as important. Reconstructing our infrastructure, energy, roads is just as important. I'm glad to hear the Prime Minister say that is one of the things that they are prioritizing. So those are some of the things that I think one would need to think about going forward. Is there potential for mining in Zimbabwe? The answer is certainly yes. It's how it's actually driven going forward from here on, to ensure that we can attract the capital. Because the capital actually doesn't exist in Zimbabwe at this point in time. In the future, it certainly will be able to be available in the country.